You know, a burst pipe, a leaky roof, maybe a flooded basement. It seems pretty straightforward, right? Water gets in, you get the water out. But what's really going on inside your walls and under your floors? Well, it's this hidden battle against time, physics, and even biology. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the world of water damage and show you what actually happens.
Okay, if you only take one thing away from this whole explainer, let it be this. The second water gets into your home, a clock starts ticking. And I'm not talking about days here, I'm talking about minutes. With every single moment that passes, that water is migrating deeper, soaking more materials, and turning what could be a simple problem into an absolute crisis. It's so easy to just look at the puddle on the floor and think that's the whole problem. But that's not how water works. In reality, water is an active invader. It finds the path of least resistance, wicking up the inside of your drywall, seeping into the subfloor, and soaking the insulation you can't even see. Seriously, what you can see is almost always just a tiny fraction of the real problem. So how do you even spot this hidden invasion? Well, your house actually leaves you clues. See swollen baseboards? That means the wood has soaked up moisture from behind the wall. And that musty smell? Yeah, that's not just unpleasant. It's often the very first sign that something is growing in a damp, dark space. Buckling floors, peeling paint, faint stains, they're all distress signals that moisture is trapped deep inside your home's structure, just silently causing damage.
And look, some homes are just way more at risk than others. Your environment can be a huge accelerator. For instance, if you live in a marine climate where it's always humid, things just never really get a chance to dry out on their own. Now, combine that with, say, old plumbing from the 70s that could fail any second, or those winter freeze-thaw cycles that love to burst pipes, and you've got a recipe for rapid, aggressive damage. In cases like that, the environment itself is pretty much working against you.
So when one of those things leads to a disaster, what happens next? This is where we get into the emergency phase, and where the pros get involved. And let me tell you, that first hour and a half after a water event, that is the most critical window to stop the damage in its tracks.
And 90 minutes? That's not just some random number pulled out of a hat. The industry standard for an emergency response is to be on site, ready to go in 90 minutes or less. Why so fast? Because speed determines the total loss. It's literally the difference between drying a structure and having to demolish it.
So once a professional crew shows up, it's like a highly organized blitz. First things first, they find the source and they stop it. Then they break out the cool tech, like thermal cameras and moisture meters, to create a detailed moisture map. This is so important because it tells them exactly what's wet and how wet it is. They're not guessing, they're using data. And only then, with that map in hand, do they start the rapid extraction of all that standing water.
Now, getting rid of all that standing water, man, it feels like a huge victory. But honestly, it's just the opening act. The real work, the part that separates a quick fix from a permanent solution, is the incredibly complex science of drying the structure itself. And you might be thinking, hey, the water's gone, we can all go home. But this is probably the single biggest misunderstanding in all of water damage. The real enemy was never the puddle you could see, it's the moisture you can't.
This is where we get into something called bound moisture. That's the water that is soaked deep inside the materials themselves. So structural drying isn't just about scattering some fans around. No way. It's a deliberate process using these massive commercial-grade dehumidifiers and air movers to literally pull that hidden moisture out of the very bones of the house. You know, the drywall, the wood framing, the subfloors.
And just to make all this more complicated, not all water is created equal. Professionals have to immediately figure out what kind of water they're dealing with. Category 1, that's clean water, like from a supply line, no big deal. But Category 3, or black water, that's from something like a sewage backup. It is grossly contaminated and requires totally different safety gear, disinfection, and often just throwing out anything it touched. Okay, this might be my favorite part because this is just pure science. It's a principle called psychrometry. Professionals are literally engineering the air inside your home. They make the air super warm and super dry, creating what they call a thirsty atmosphere. This thirsty air then pulls all the moisture out of the wet materials, which then gets captured by the dehumidifiers. So they're not just drying the air, they're using the air to dry the house. So cool.
And all that science is exactly why this process takes time. You simply can't rush physics. Something porous like drywall might dry out in 3 to 5 days, but dense hardwood floors, that could take over a week. And a concrete slab that's totally saturated, we're talking 2 weeks or more. Patience and process are absolutely everything.
So this brings us to a really common point of confusion. You'll hear these two words thrown around, mitigation and restoration. And while they work together, they are two very, very different jobs.
Okay, so here's the crucial difference. Mitigation is the emergency response. Think of it like ER doctors stopping the bleeding. Their job is to extract water, dry everything out, and get rid of anything that just can't be saved. Restoration, that's the rebuild. That's the surgery and recovery, putting up new drywall, installing new floors, painting, everything it takes to get the property back to how it was before the whole mess started. And that brings us right back to where we started, that ticking clock. We've talked about what happens, but now let's talk about why every single second counts. See, you're not just racing against water, you're racing against what comes next. This right here, this is the deadline. In a damp, humid environment, mold can start to grow and colonize in as little as 24 to 48 hours. The moment mold takes hold, your water damage problem just became an air quality and a health problem, and that requires a whole different level of work. That 2-day window, it is everything.
And the cost of that delay? It goes up exponentially. If you act within the first 24 hours, you're mostly just paying for extraction and drying. But wait longer, and the costs climb because materials are more saturated and more stuff has to be torn out. Cross that 48-hour mark, though, and now you're potentially paying for mold remediation and major structural repairs on top of everything else. In this situation, time is literally money.
Ultimately, it all just boils down to this one simple truth. The initial damage from the water itself, that's unavoidable. But all that secondary damage, the mold, the rot, the collapsing drywall, most of that is actually preventable. Your response time is the single biggest factor that determines the final cost and the total scope of the repair. So, let's just end with a little thought experiment. Imagine a pipe bursts in your home, right now. The clock has officially started ticking. Knowing what you know now about the hidden invasion of water, the science of drying, and that critical 48-hour deadline, what's your next move?